On this Saturday night, let the campaigning begin in Nova Scotia. Another provincial election in the pandemic.
Can my kids go to school? Are we going to be able to have steady incomes?
The issues facing the Premier, who was just sworn in 5 months ago. Volatile tinderboxes. The race to keep up with wildfires erupting across Canada and the U.S. Descent under a dictatorship. The Cuban crisis fueling an uprising. Plus, save the manatees.
They're a very key species.
What's killing these gentle giants of the sea?
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. After weeks of speculation, the Nova Scotia government has called a summer election. At the request of Premier Iain Rankin, the Lieutenant Governor dissolved the legislature. Voters will head to the polls August 17th. Rankin is hoping to secure a third consecutive term for his Liberal Party.
This province is at a pivotal moment, and we need to continue to make the right decisions for workers, for seniors, for families, and for all Nova Scotians. This election will be about how we best position the province for a strong economic recovery.
Rankin took office before Nova Scotia entered its third wave of the pandemic. There have been no new cases for 4 days in a row, and the province entered phase 4 of its reopening plan this week. As Ross Lord reports, with no fixed election dates in Nova Scotia, it's no coincidence the election is being called now.
The third wave of COVID-19 is a thing of the past in Nova Scotia, but the pandemic is still front and center in the minds of the voting public.
People are feeling a lot better about what they need and what they want, and we look for good leadership.
Can my kids go to school? Are we going to be able to have steady incomes? Are businesses and shops going to open back up?
Political analysts say Liberal Premier Iain Rankin, who's been on the job for only 5 months, has good reason to be confident that he'll continue a pandemic pattern. Incumbents winning with an increased number of seats.
The feds have been showering the province with cash. The province has been showering the people with spending promises. The big healthcare unions have just signed off on a sweet new agreement. The weather is warm, the mood is high, the bills haven't come in yet, so all the ducks are now in a row.
A great time for a sitting premier to go to the polls, except there's been a recent setback for Rankin. An impaired driving conviction that just came to light from when he was a young man.
I was fined and my license was suspended for 1 year. 2 years later, I was charged with the same offense, but was eventually found to be innocent.
Not exactly. A breathalyzer test showed Rankin was impaired, but he won an appeal on a technicality and was eventually let off the hook. Political damage could be overshadowed by a wide-open money hose, funding things like the $10 a day childcare Rankin promised along with the federal government at a cost of $600 million.
Affordable childcare will benefit thousands of working families, no doubt, particularly women and children in our province.
The timing of the election would see the campaign completed before the start of the Mass Casualty Commission's public hearings into the Portapique massacre, which left 22 people dead and sparked outrage that authorities did not prevent it. His opponents, Tim Houston of the PCs and the NDP's Gary Burrell, have more experience as leaders, but neither man has captured the public's attention, something that could be a challenge for all three in a summertime election campaign. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Calls are growing for the BC government to declare a state of emergency over the province's devastating wildfires. Thousands of people are on evacuation order or alert. The fires are concentrated in southeastern BC, and air quality alerts are in place for about half the province. It's not just BC burning up. Sweltering heat has triggered an uptick of fires in parts of the Prairies and Ontario. But as Catherine Urquhart reports, more help is on the way.
There it is.
Wildfires burning across BC now total more than 300. It's an unprecedented situation, with residents of 2,000 plus homes on evacuation order.
To date, we've had roughly 240,000 hectares burned. We're generally at 65 or so thousand hectares burned.
There have been continued calls for the provincial government to declare a state of emergency. The Premier says it's not warranted, and he'll wait until it's requested by emergency management officials.
I'm absolutely prepared to call a state of emergency when it is required by those professionals that are putting their lives on the line.
100 Mile House and Ashcroft are among the communities on evacuation alert. Long-term care residents have been moved in case the fires advance. At the Cunningham Cattle Ranch, they're surrounded by flames.
Right in the middle of it. It's all around us, except for the little bit on the east side.
The village of Lytton, which was decimated by wildfire June 30th, is planning a rebuild. It will be challenging. Everything was destroyed, including the town's office and their 2 servers.
The residents whose houses are no more, they'll be in hotels until such time as we get our temporary housing in place.
Also battling record-setting wildfires, Saskatchewan. An alert was issued discouraging all non-essential travel in the province's north, where wildfires threaten a number of communities.
Hopefully our firefighters are safe, so they're doing one heck of a job, and tip my hat to them.
BC's wildfire smoke has also been blowing into Alberta, resulting in air quality advisories. And the fire season is far from over. More help for BC's firefighters is expected in the days ahead, with personnel coming from across the country. More than 100 firefighters from Mexico are expected to arrive in a week. Catherine Urquhart, Global News, Vancouver.
Dozens of wildfires are also scorching parts of the U.S. tonight. This wall of flames on the border between California and Nevada exploded overnight, triggering evacuations. Jennifer Johnson looks at what's fanning the flames south of the border.
2 million Americans in several western states are under red flag warnings, alerts that wildfires are raging out of control. Oregon's Bootleg Fire is the season's first official mega fire of 2021, consuming over 97,000 hectares.
80-year-old couple out there that have worked their whole lives for a home, and we go and save it.
The Bootleg Fire is now 7 times the size of San Francisco. In Washington, only 3 of 10 of that state's largest wildfires are contained, as fire officials order more evacuations. It
was a little emotional having to wake a 7 and 8-year-old up and telling them you got to leave the house.
In California, the Beckworth Fire is the state's largest, taking homes from 33 families in the small town of Doyle.
Right now there's a lot of emotion, a lot of anger. Everybody believes that the fire should never have made it this far.
Further west, the Dixie Fire is coming dangerously close to Paradise, a town destroyed 3 years ago by the Camp Fire.
It's just an icky feeling, because you never know. And you don't know if it's you never know.
More than 60% of the U.S. West is suffering from extreme drought, the highest rating since monitoring began 20 years ago. Scientists say human-caused climate change is producing more heat but no rain, the perfect combination to fuel fires. Lake Mead, which provides water to 4 states, is at its lowest level since the 1930s.
Climate change has a very strong fingerprint on exactly what we're seeing right now at Lake Mead. It has never been this low. It really, truly is unprecedented.
Officials closed the lake this weekend to boaters, citing dangerous low water levels. Everything is drying up.
It's like a stocked fireplace, tinder packed, ready to go up.
This fire season is about 6 weeks ahead of schedule, and already more land has burned than in 2020, worrying those on the front lines.
The vegetation around here is very, very dry, very dangerous. Any little spark can, ignite another flame and another fire, and it's off to the races again.
Firefighters are weary and stretched thin, with the worst of the fire season yet to come. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Record floodwaters are receding in parts of Europe where at least 170 people were killed. In hard-hit Germany, levels are now low enough for divers to search for bodies in stranded vehicles. The heaviest rainfall in a century burst riverbanks and swept through communities all over Western Europe. Pumps are working around the clock to remove excess water, and sandbags are still going up over fears dams could collapse. In the UK, health officials are accusing Prime Minister Boris Johnson of letting COVID rip. On Monday, Britain will end lockdown restrictions despite daily new cases reaching a 6-month high. And the newly appointed health secretary is among those who have tested positive.
I'm now self-isolating at home with my family until I get the results of the PCR.
Sajid Javed says he's thankful to be fully vaccinated and only has mild symptoms. But 32% of British adults and children have not had both doses. The UK reported more than 54,000 new cases today, with the Delta variant accounting for 90% of new infections. And less than a week before the Olympics begin, an overseas visitor has tested positive for COVID at the Athletes' Village in Tokyo. The person who was involved in organizing the games is now in quarantine. The case further fuels concerns the virus could spread through Olympic facilities. Back here in Canada, more people are getting immunized against COVID-19. About 80% of everyone eligible has received one dose, and more than half of Canadians aged 12 and older are fully vaccinated. But one group, Gen Z, is hesitant to get the shot, and that could be a big barrier to mass immunity. As Jamie Maracher explains, there's a mission to get these young people motivated to roll up their sleeves.
21-year-old Tori Perreno knows the best way to reach her generation is through social media. So it was a no-brainer for her to use the power of her platforms to spread awareness about the COVID-19 vaccine, teaming up with a gaming company in a campaign called LG I Got the Shot.
And we got close to 5.5 million people to pay attention to the campaign.
Public health experts say vaccinating young adults is essential to keeping infection numbers low. In the U.S., just 42% of 18 to 24-year-olds have been fully vaccinated, compared to 60% of all adults. In Canada, in part to delayed vaccine rollouts, the numbers are currently even lower, with just under 30% of ages 18 to 29 double-dosed.
There's always this daring aspect, this risk-taking aspect.
Those feelings of invincibility and immortality are only part of the problem, say experts, adding misinformation, fear, and complacency can all be reasons that Gen Z don't get the jab. And the solutions, not one size fits all.
You're not going to solve it because people are going to react in different ways. But there is, I still think, a commonality of sense, of common sense, into which we can tap.
And if that doesn't work, star power can be influential too.
I'm in awe of the work President Biden and Dr. Fauci have done and was happy to help lend my support to this important initiative.
That's 18-year-old pop star Olivia Rodrigo promoting vaccination at the White House this week. Perreno supports that kind of PSA, but says mostly her generation is just looking for clear facts.
Based off of how everyone sees it, it kind of seems like a lot of them are overwhelmed with the amount of information.
Hoping to use her reach to spread information responsibly and influence others to do their part to end the pandemic. Jamie Maracher, Global News, Toronto.
A search for unmarked graves got underway today at the former Delmas residential school in Saskatchewan. Crews are using ground-penetrating radar to scour the former school grounds. The school was operated by the Roman Catholic Church from 1901 to 1948, when it burned down. Coming up, the call for political change in communist Cuba. In the communist country of Cuba, speaking out can have dire consequences. So scenes like this are rare. Thousands of Cubans have taken to the streets to show they're not afraid and they're fed up. The pandemic, the poor economy, a crisis over food and medicine, and a lack of freedom have tempers flaring. Reggie Cicchini tonight on the dissent born from desperation and the hopes the world will take notice.
The echoes of the largest revolt in decades still resonate in the streets of Cuba. Frustrated, hungry, and terrified residents hurled their anger towards a government they see as having failed the country. This protester says the crowds chanted, "We want medicine, we want food." The island's coffers are empty. There's a critical food shortage, the healthcare system is in shambles, vaccine supply is limited. And after initially blaming America's embargo for the crisis, Cuba's president accepted some responsibility, a rare moment of contrition.
The government, since it is somewhat allergic to doing real change, maybe that's what's happening, that they're seeing their survival at stake here.
The protests, driven by social media, led to an internet shutdown to prevent the world from seeing the chaos. The uprising has fostered fears of a new wave of defections by boat. But freedom, a mere 120 kilometers away, feels impossibly out of reach for most.
If you take to the sea, you will not come to the United States.
The Biden administration is facing mounting pressure from the Cuban exile community to do something.
I don't have anything to predict for you in terms of any policy shift.
The more aggressive in tone that the U.S. responds to this, the greater the degree to which the government in Cuba says, see, this is an excuse for the U.S. to act aggressively.
Ottawa has also been criticized for taking a passive approach to the crisis, but changed its tune on Thursday.
We stand, as we always will, with the people of Cuba who want and deserve democracy, freedom, and respect.
The protest did lead to minor concessions, a temporary lift on restrictions, limiting how much food or medicine travelers can bring in, a band-aid solution to an economic meltdown.
Part of what we're seeing is this call for the government to be much more accountable and to essentially say, deal with this or leave, or let somebody else do it.
Even if fractures formed from this historic pushback, the Cuban government is giving no indication it intends to further bend. Reggie Cicchini, Global News, Washington.
Still ahead, the species at risk. Why are manatees dying at an alarming rate? Don't blink or you'll miss it. It might look like a bug on your screen, but that is the International Space Station seen transiting past the moon. The site was captured from Spain's Canary Islands in slow motion. According to NASA, the space station travels at a speed of nearly 25,000 kilometers per hour as it orbits Earth approximately 16 times a day. The race is on tonight to stop an ecological disaster in the waters off Florida and save the state's marine mammal. Manatees are known to be quite resilient, learning to adapt to the environment around them. But this year, an unprecedented number has perished. Jackson Prosco explains why these sea creatures are starving to death and who's to blame.
There's a reason they're called sea cows. Manatees are the gentle giants of the ocean. In normal times, they lumber along, searching for warm water and grazing on seagrass. But this year has proven especially deadly and difficult for the species. Manatees are dying off at an alarming rate.
The manatees are actually a really good indicator of what's happening in the environment. They're a very key species. So seeing so many manatees die is actually an indicator that there is definitely something wrong, something very wrong with the ecosystem.
At least 840 manatees have died so far this year in Florida, far surpassing the total number of deaths for all of 2020. More often than not, they're starving. The seagrass they eat is being choked out by algae blooms. Fertilizers and runoff end up in the water, feeding the blooms, which block the sunlight needed to grow the manatee's food supply.
It's affecting all of the fish, the crabs, everything that's dependent on the water out here and seagrass.
Florida's Save the Manatee Club recently rescued and rehabilitated an emaciated manatee named Mandy, along with her calf. Mandy weighed just 400 kilograms. She should have weighed over 1,000.
That just shows you how emaciated she really was when she was rescued, and that's the case with a lot of manatees out there.
A devastating outbreak of red tide in Florida has only added to the manatees' woes. They're being killed off along with thousands of fish and other sea mammals. The situation is now so dire, environmentalists are pushing for manatees to be added back to the endangered species list.
It's a problem that we cannot fix overnight, but first and foremost, we do need to clean up the water quality. We do need to replant seagrasses.
Time is not on the manatees' side. They reproduce slowly, and at current rates, up to 1/3 of Florida's manatee population could die this year. It's a man-made disaster that threatens this beloved ocean mammal. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Up next, the Canadian entrepreneur who is giving back to Indigenous communities. A Canadian entrepreneur is making a name for herself in the makeup industry. Jennifer Harper started Cheekbone Beauty with only $500. Now she's taking orders from the other side of the world. But her company is about more than just cosmetics. As Kayla McLean explains, it's about empowering Indigenous people to believe in themselves.
So you just scoop it and scrape it in.
Owning her own lab and cosmetic line Cheekbone Beauty is the stuff Jennifer Harper's dreams are made of, literally.
I had a dream about lip gloss and super happy Native little girls back in 2015. And that night I literally grabbed my laptop and started writing out the business plan.
From no industry experience to CEO of a Canadian-made beauty brand receiving orders as far as Australia.
Some days I sit there and I'm like, what? Who's this? What's happening here?
It feels surreal, partly because of how much she's overcome. Alcoholism, identity issues, and the pain of losing her brother to suicide. Learning her grandmother was a residential school survivor made everything click.
If there is a trauma, that does tend to go on for generations unless someone chooses to correct it or heal it.
Understanding the lasting effects of colonial abuse on Indigenous people propelled the Anishinaabe entrepreneur to break the cycle. Empowered by her brother's last words to her,
he said, our youth need hope and they need help.
Harper evolved Cheekbone Beauty into a makeup brand where Indigenous people can feel supported, celebrated, and seen.
The original collection was called the Warrior Women. Every one of these shades was named after a really inspiring, strong Indigenous woman.
And for every makeup product sold, a portion of the proceeds go back to organizations supporting Indigenous communities.
For us as a business, it's about supporting Indigenous youth and sort of any idea of any education endeavor that they choose to go on.
The Indie brand is not only giving back to people, but the planet too.
So when the lipstick's all done, you literally would just take the cap and this can go in your compost and it is biodegradable.
Created with sustainable ingredients and packaging, her products are named after the words for land in several First Nations languages, reflecting the people's deep connection to nature and duty to future generations.
She's paving the way for us.
Indigenous regalia maker Deanne Hupfield, who's mentored by Harper, sees Cheekbone Beauty's work as not only healing, but motivating.
No other Indigenous women are doing a business like hers, so at this time, it's really great to see that.
We know that we're not the solution to all of these big, huge problems that happen around us, but if we can be like a little glimmer of light in sort of a dark space, then we feel really good about the work we're doing.
Kayla McLean, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Lake Huron in the town of Blind River, Ontario. We would love to see your corner of the country, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.